Thank you. Yeah, it's a great privilege to show in this wonderful museum. Okay, well, my greatest joy is in taking an old piece of wood and transforming it into a work of art. And since wood comes from trees, I want to begin by saying a few words about trees. You hear of people who talk to trees, but when I'm around trees, they're the ones that do the talking, and I just listen. And I've learned a lot from listening to trees. There's just a couple of things that I want to share that I've learned. The first one is the importance of always being present right where you are. Trees are very good at that. It's good advice for people too, but it's especially essential in sculpture because every piece of sculpture has to convey a sense of presence that speaks to the observer. And what it says will be different for each of us. I can't tell you what a particular piece of art means any more than I can tell you what a tree in the forest means. The interpretation is individual. You come to it with your life experience, your thoughts, your feelings, your expectations, and then it responds to you based on what you bring to it. But that only happens when you allow yourself to be present. The second thing I want to say about trees is that they provide what I call a space of grace. It's a kind of a feeling of relaxation, of, I don't know, just being allowed to just be. A feeling of feeling accepted and acknowledged without being judged. It's hard to put into words, but I think you know what I mean, because I expect you've all felt that. It's pretty hard to live in the Pacific Northwest without having a close relationship with trees. Well, my hope for the sculptures I create is that they too will provide a space of grace for those who stop to look and pay attention. You know, in a world so full of turmoil, we need to summon the natural beauty of our planet and to find that tranquil place that exists within each one of us. And art can help us do that. It can help us reclaim a relationship with what seems lost. One word that I associate with the creative process is the word blessedness. Now, I found a definition of that in the dictionary some time ago that said, blessedness is an inner fountain of joy in the soul itself. An inner fountain of joy in the soul itself. Now, that's what drives the creative process. It's that source of inner inspiration and energy that demands to be outwardly expressed. And for me, that expression happens in partnership with a piece of wood. And there are two ways that happens for me. One is when the wood suggests to me what to do with it. And the other is when I get an idea first and then I find a piece of wood that will allow me to do that. So the first way, this is a maple burl. Often with burl wood, a wood that has any particular characteristics to it other than just a block of wood, that's the kind of wood that suggests to me what I ought to do. Because I like to maintain something of the characteristic that the wood itself has. And in this case, I wanted to maintain something of that, and so I start by looking at the piece of wood and thinking, what does it suggest to me that I might be able to do that will honor that particular piece of wood? And then when I come up with an idea, I began whittling away, and that was the result from this piece of wood. Another example is this, which is a piece of a root of a redwood tree. And that has a pretty unique character. And before I tell you what I did with it, just look at it a minute and see what you think. You don't have to say out loud, but just think of the process that I go through looking at that and say, what does that suggest? What does it look like? And to me, I began to see, well, some cliffs on the edge of the ocean somewhere. So I get the idea in my mind, and then I begin working on it to see what's in there. And in this case, that's what came out of it. Well, the other way that I work with wood that I mentioned is when I get an idea first and then look for the piece of wood. And that's like if I have a commission and somebody asks me to do a particular thing, and then we would work with maybe a photo or some sketches and come up with the idea of what they want. And then I would look for the piece of wood that would allow me to do that. Another example was when I was asked to make a sculpture for an exhibition that was focused on maps. And every piece of art had to have some relationship to a map. So I thought about what to do, and one of the things that I'm interested in is the plight of the polar bears losing their habitat in the North Pole because of the melting ice. And so I thought I would do something related to the Northern Hemisphere. And when I begin with an idea, often what I'll do first is go to the internet and go to Google and put in images for whatever I want to see. And as you may know, you can find images on anything you can imagine by doing that and get pages of images. So I look for images of polar bears to get an idea of what I might do related to the polar bear. And I'll just show you 3 of the ones I found that spoke to me particularly. Yeah, so then after seeing those, I began to get an idea in my mind of what I'm going to do, and then I knew that I wanted to do the Northern Hemisphere, so I got one of those blow-up globes, just, about like this, and it shows where all the countries are. And then I looked for the piece of wood, and in this case, I happened to have a nice chunk of Port Orford cedar, which was very light colored, which I needed the light color. It was about a 12-inch by 12-inch cube. And then I began working, and this shows where I've partly begun to work, and there's some of my tools. I can use a saw to get rid of some of the bigger parts, and then I use a chisel for a lot of it. And you can see I just barely sketch out where I want the bears to be, but when I actually get to carving that, I just chip away until I find them up there somewhere. So that was the final result.
Marceil, if I could just let people know, that piece is in the upstairs gallery, so really encourage everybody to go up, at some point if they haven't been upstairs yet, but that is in the glass cases called Garden Gallery, just beyond the Artist Book Room.
Thank you. Yes, and that's the one that you featured on the card, which is available too. Okay, then most of the time I do work just by looking for a picture or doing a brief sketch or something like that. I don't generally have any 3D models to look at, but occasionally I will use a 3-dimensional model. And the very first serious sculpture that I ever did, some almost 40 years ago now, I did have a live model. Well, actually it was a dead model. That was a rat, and the reason for that was because I had always fiddled around with wood and done little sculptures, just gifty type things once in a while for somebody, but I hadn't done anything really serious. But one of my older sisters, wanting to encourage me, said that she would pay me $50 if I would carve a rat for her, because she had a friend who had a pet white rat, and I guess she wanted to give her something for her birthday. So I said fine, And I thought, well, I'm getting paid. I've never been paid before, so I better do something really serious here. Well, we lived out in the country, and my dad set rat traps and by the compost sometimes, so he happened to get a dead one. And I said, oh, don't throw that away, I need that. So I would set the rat in the vise. There you can see it in the position that I wanted it. And there you can see the sculpture that I'd begun working on. And then I would put it in the refrigerator at night, get it out. And there's another picture of me working on the rat. Well, that actually, I'll show you the result. It turned out pretty well. And so I wanted to show it to someone I knew in a gallery, I wasn't letting him have it, I just wanted his comment on it. And he said, well, you could sell that for $400. Well, that was a lot of money back then. So I didn't want to let my sister have it for $50. So I told her I would do something else for her, and I was keeping that rat. And I have kept it because it has a special meaning for me, since it was the first thing that really let me know I could do serious sculpture. So that one will never be for sale, and it's the one that I show on my business card. Another time when I had a model was when I carved a banana. Then I would have a banana for lunch, and before I would eat it, I would peel it in the position I needed. So I get that clear in my mind, and then I would work on it. And the next day I'd have another one until I got the result of the banana. And that is the carving is an actual size banana, which is upstairs in one of the galleries. Now that is yellow cedar, Alaskan yellow cedar, which has that nice light, slight yellowish color. So I don't generally color wood. I like to let the natural wood speak for itself. I usually just put a light coat of oil, clear oil on it. So the oil makes it slightly darker. So that one, don't know if you can tell, it has oil on the outside of the banana to make it just a little bit darker, and then a clear wax on the flesh of the banana to keep it that nice light color. Well, the last thing I want to talk about that's unique to wood is grain. The grain of the wood is a characteristic that's different from what you find in other media used in art. Generally, the tighter the grain, the more valuable the wood. And you find that wood mostly in old growth forests, which have been heavily logged, so we don't get much of that anymore. And one example of that is Port Orford cedar, which is one of my favorite woods. It's native to southern Oregon, but there's not much there anymore. The only way really to find it is if some of the old pieces are left as driftwood in southern Oregon. And that's how I got really the best piece of wood I ever worked with, which I had some cousins who lived on the Oregon coast. And they gave me a nice chunk of Port Orford cedar back when I first began doing this work, which was some 30, 40 years ago. And they only used that wood just to cut up little pieces and put in their underwear drawer because it has such a wonderful fragrance. I used a bit of it then, and then when I had stopped doing this kind of work for quite a while, as my life went in other directions, it was a long time before I got back to this work, and it's only 5 years ago that I started full-time doing wood sculpture, and I still had one chunk of that piece of wood left, just enough to do this. And I want to show you this because of the grain, whether you can tell, the grain is so tight, you know, on here, and it's a dream to carve because it yields so well to the chisel. And I'm going to contrast that with the kind of Port Orford that is available today, second row, and see how wide the grain is there. Now in this case, it works because that wide grain really helps to show that cloth over the box. But that's just to show you the difference between grain and wood, what a difference it can make. And use of grain can either make or break a sculpture. When I talked about being a partnership with the wood, this is one of the ways that happens. The grain always reminds me that I'm not always in control. The wood has something to say about the final outcome, because the use of grain is always going to make a difference. Now, one last thing I'll mention about, well, it relates to grain. It has to do with the rings of the tree. The outer ring, the just small outer ring, is usually very light color, whereas the inner wood is darker. And sometimes I use that to advantage, such as in this piece, where that's all the natural color of the wood. So the roots of that stump that are white are all the natural outer ring, whereas the inside is the darker wood. And that piece, called Judgment, has faces of animals and birds throughout it. That one isn't in the show here because it needed to be someplace else, but I wanted to show you that because of the use of the wood. There's another example here of how that whitish outer grain can be used. This one I left just a little bit, a strip of that white, to suggest the chipmunk. Okay, I want to end where I began, with trees, because that's what it's all about for me. I prefer to leave standing trees standing and only use wood that's been lying around, aging in someone's wood pile or garage or washed up on the beach. There's a special joy in giving new life to old discards. So finally, I'll leave you with those first two lessons that I learned from trees. Always be fully present right where you are, and enjoy being in that space of grace that is felt around living trees and reflected in art that's made from fallen trees. Oh, I do have some business cards on the table outside that have my website if you wanted to take a look and see